In this second formula, we're going to learn about the simple interest formula. And this is what we use when we only calculate interest once. So the simple interest formula is the I equals PRT, where I represents interest, P is the principal or beginning balance, R is the rate. It is always expressed as a decimal. And T is the number of years. It has to be in years. So in this first example, Mitchell deposits $1,200. So he deposits $1,200 into an account that pays 4.5% simple interest. He keeps the money in the account for 3 years without any deposits or withdrawals. So that is the three important parts of it. How much is in the account after 3 years? So we need to use the simple interest formula, I equals PRT. So if we identify the parts of this, we know that deposits, the 1,200, that represents our principal. Simple interest, the percent, this is our rate. And 3 years represents the time that we're calculating for. So I list my variables on the side and I convert the percent into a decimal format. The next thing we need to do is to calculate the interest. Now, this isn't going to be the balance. This is simply the interest that we earn on our balance. So we'll have to do something else after we calculate the interest. So we would fill in our formula with our amounts we identified for our variable and solve, and we would find that Mitchell would earn an interest of $162. So the next thing we would need to do is we need to add the interest and the principal because we've earned that interest. It is now ours. And when you add the interest, 162 plus the principal amount of $1,200, we find that we now have $1,362. So the balance in 3 years is $1,362. So let's try another problem. How much simple interest is earned on $4,000 in 3.5 years at an interest rate of 5.2%? So when we fill in our identify, we know $4,000, that's our principal. 3.5 years would be our time, and 5.2% would be our rate. So our identified variables would be P equals 4,000, R equals 0.052 for our rate, and T would equal 3.5. So when you have a fraction, you need to make sure and convert it to a decimal if you can, because it'll be easier when you do your calculations. So starting with our simple interest formula, we fill it in and solve it, and we find that the interest is $728. Now we have to look at what is this question asking? And this question is asking how much simple interest. So in this case, I do not need to add our interest amount back into our balance like we did in the first example, because it's only asking for the interest. It's not asking what our new balance is. So our answer would be interest earned is $728. So let's do another example. How much simple interest does $2,000 earn in 7 months at an interest rate of 5%? So 2,000 is our principal, 7 months is our time, and our rate is 5%. So when we are going through solving this, we need to make sure that we fill in our variables. So we know principal is 2,000, rate converted would be 0.05, And the one thing that you have to remember is when you do the 7 months, okay, that is really 7 out of 12 months would represent the years. So you have to convert the months to years because time is represented in years. So filling in the formula, I equals PRT, we would leave now you could take and convert that 7 over 12 into a decimal if you want. I just left it over 7 over 12, entered it into my calculator, and interest was approximately 58.33. So interest is $58.33. So in this problem, they only asked how much simple interest. And that's why I left it as $58.33. So how much simple interest would $800 earn in 300 days in a non-leap year at a rate of 5.71%? So this non-leap year is important because if you remember, in a leap year, it adds an extra day to the calendar. So figuring out our variables, we know that principal is 800, rate is 0.0571. We know that there are 365 days in a year. Okay, so there's 365 days in a year. That's a non-leap year. And when we put that in for a variable, we would take our 300 days, put it in fraction form to represent a year, 300 divided by 365. So in this case, what are we looking for? We're looking for how much simple interest. So once again, we're not going to have to add it back in to our original principal. So doing the calculation, we fill in our formula, and when we solve it, we get this big decimal. Now remember, we're dealing with money here. So you want to make sure that you round your number to the second decimal spot, okay? So if there is, we want to round this 4, and if we look after it, it's got a 5. And if you remember, anything that's 5 or above says round that number up. So our interest is actually going to be $37.55.